Welcome to The Rundown, a show of reflective conversations with leaders to talk about the common good while combining faith, culture, and the latest news. I'm Bridget Richardson at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'm here with two guests today that I'm super excited about. Sharon Zachary, she's the CEO of the Alliance of Community Assistance Ministries, or ACAM, and then Thao Costis, President and CEO of Search Homeless Services. So thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and we wanted to have this discussion because I've been on the email list for Search for so long. I got the email that you sent out, Thao, recently about how there was a CNN story that talked about evictions in Houston specifically. So maybe could you update us on that story? It was last month, and then maybe give us a more Houston-focused perspective.
Right. Well, it's always troubling when our local community hits the national news, and in this case, it was a story that CNN featured about an officer who was doing his job of basically serving notice to families, individuals, households who were being evicted, and it was happening in that moment, and he was talking to a young man who had a toddler or two toddlers and the mother, and they were having to walk away from everything that they had. And it was heartbreaking. And then an older woman who he just couldn't bear to have her just be gone that day because she had nowhere else to go. So he found the permission to let her stay one more day. One more day, it could make a difference, but it's still very, very difficult situations.
And you had talked earlier when we discussed it about some of the rules and regulations for how long you can stay in a home versus when you would transfer into the area that Sharon and you kind of operate in. So maybe you could explain a little bit of that.
Yes, well, I think people, right now, we're all very in tune to preventing evictions and preventing homelessness. And Search is in the homeless service sector, and Sharon is in the assistance ministries. And so working with a lot of different people and a lot of different needs to keep people financially more capable and not homeless. So there's a fine line of where Sharon's organization's ACAM starts and stops, and where we can then start and stop. And with homeless services, because of HUD, Housing Urban Development, their rules are that people have to be literally homeless before we and the dollars that are allocated to our services can intercede. So you have to be out on the street or in a shelter at least the day before, the night before you qualify for our services. So that family, they walked away from that apartment that day, but, could we have stepped in? Probably not until the next day. So Sharon, maybe, you could share from your perspective how that kind of separates us.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing are different groups of people coming for help, all feeling incredibly anxious about their housing. Okay. And that could be calls for assistance to the partnering organizations saying, I need help with next month's rent. I know I'm not going to be able to pay next month's rent, all the way to I have a eviction notice. And if I don't get help soon, I will be visiting, Search Homeless Services and entering what we call the coordinated access system. And right now, because of COVID, the economic impact, the volume of clients that are requesting assistance is just unbelievable. So the Assistance Ministry Network is looking at serving about 6,800 people a day. With various levels of services from basic human needs all the way to homelessness prevention, food, benefits, access services, trying to triage as many clients as we can while still applying appropriate level of care. So you want to try to enroll in your deepest programs, your homelessness prevention programs. Those who, but for the assistance, will likely enter coordinated assistance or be sleeping in a place not meant for human habitation, a car or whatever, in very short order. But also prevent clients who maybe families who need a little eviction prevention, right? Who are not yet at that level of intervention, but could be in a month from now if we don't do the right things. So there's a whole continuum of services that can be rendered to clients to try to prevent homelessness.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult for people who aren't in this work to understand the range of need, and so for somebody to fall into homelessness, and that's why we can't intercede before they actually get to this place where they have no other alternatives, is that there are people who can figure it out, right? Because they have a network of support, or they have potential options that they could explore rather than ending up being out on the street. Because yes, that's like the worst scenario for people. And so our intervention is for those worst case scenarios. So if there's any way that people can find different levels of solutions, we want that to occur. And so that's the magic of what Sharon's group is really helping them to explore and pursue.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that there's new levels of interventions that have been brought forward because of the onslaught from COVID. And Sharon, you had described it earlier. It almost is like, the disaster kind of outreach that you're doing. So maybe both of you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Sharon, maybe you start with the disaster approach there.
I think that we're used to being deployed in times of disaster. I mean, we're right after the first responders because the assistance ministries and other assistance organizations that we partner with are the ones passing out water, food, financial assistance, and other meeting other needs during that ride after disaster, between disaster and recovery. So, with the COVID response, the economic crisis, that's also happening. And I think they were in the prime position to deal with those basic human needs, right, during this crisis. So, but the depth of this crisis is different. It is longer. It's nationwide. I don't want to liken it to a war, but I don't have another comparison that would make good sense as to the scale of this kind of disaster. After Harvey, the ministry served 105,000 Harvey victims. That was one of the biggest disasters in the United States had ever seen. And yet this is far larger and far longer in duration than that was. So there's a need now to really take a look at how do we preserve resources. There isn't enough resources to go around. The need is vast. The anxiety of our clients is profound. And yet we need to sit back and say, can we put different intervention levels that maybe preserve some resources, but still meet the need? So, flexible financial assistance, wonderful. Some of our families will resolve with a stimulus check or will be helped by a flexible financial assistance check of $1,200. If that works, then that's the right level of care. What we found was there was a gap, but because so many clients are so many months behind in arrears than we've ever seen before, we're looking at the consequences of some well-intended, actions such as, eviction moratoriums. They're great. They do prevent immediate homelessness. They do prevent that immediate eviction. But the clients have not been, the families have not been relieved of their rent burden, and the arrears is accruing. I think Moody's said that it's predicted that there'll be $70 billion in back rent due by the end of December, and the average back rent arrears amount will skyrocket to $5,400 by December. From our eviction prevention program, that's looking very, very realistic in Houston. Right now we're at a $2,800 average arrears amount. But when you look at the cost of homelessness, And the cost to a family, when 52% of the people we're serving are children, we're looking at putting a lot of families potentially into family homelessness. And the cost of that, one state said $68,000 per family. Okay, that to prevent them from entering the homeless system. So even though those sound like staggering numbers, the cost of having so many families become homeless is far more.
Yeah, we're really, the value of prevention is so critical, and so people have been asking us, are we seeing a spike yet in homelessness? And we have seen some numbers and some more people coming to our doors that are unexpected or atypical, but we're a little bit of a delayed reaction to what's about to come. So we too are trying to prepare for what is about to come, and how do we try to get as many people into housing as possible before the next wave, or as the next wave is starting to build. And so you were asking about different types of interventions. And so one of the things that we have that is new to our community is the diversion, what we're calling diversion. So they have somehow missed these opportunities that the assistance ministries or these prevention efforts have put in place, and they show up at a shelter or one of our day centers. And so our energy is going to go into, okay, let's keep digging a little bit further before you get stuck and, you go into homelessness. And then it's so much more expensive, because it is about economics. I mean, when somebody has lost their home, how much more expensive it is to get them back into a home. When you're having to get that utility started up again, and first month's rent and last month's rent and security deposit. I mean, who can come up with that kind of cash? And of course, as Sharon said, they were already behind. So how do we really explore those relationships and opportunities that person may be able to come up with a little bit of financial help? So we don't want to just leave them in a lurch and just expect that they're going to be able to resolve or get back with a relationship that was somewhat fragile, but needs a little funding to help pay for some of that extra rent or whatever costs that person's going to come with. So there's the diversion piece. But yes, so then really pushing on what we've been doing, which is, hey, let's get people into their own homes who have been homeless, so that as new people come along, we're able to really just keep that number, flat or continue to decrease rather than growing.
Right. And one of the other interventions is the rapid rehousing that you had touched on. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so rapid rehousing is basically about 1 year's worth of rental assistance for that household, individual or family, that they do find themselves homeless and they don't have any other option or partner or friends or family that they can go live with. And so they do need to be in their own place. We provide wraparound support, case management support, as well as the financial support, so that we can help this household rebuild again, get back to work, figure out what is the reasonable amount of rent that you can afford, because yes, we can help you with your rent for about a year, but it's going to be gone. So how are we going to make it work once these dollars and resources are gone? But yes, so we want to get them that furniture. If they had to walk away from their home and, it's locked, they can't get back into it, how do you start over? So it's all part of that initiative.
Right. And when we talked earlier, I was so fascinated with diversion because both of you seem to try to help people enter into those more difficult relationships in their lives, that to where they may not be able to ask a friend or a family member, can I stay with you for an undetermined amount of time? So how do you work that diversion practice of working with people on those difficult relationships, or even to think about who could I ask to stay with for who knows how long, right?
Yeah, I don't know, Sharon, are you guys doing that pretty regularly now yet?
I think that, it's kind of semantics. I mean, you can do diversion right before you present at a shelter, or you can do the diversion right after you present at a shelter. We'll do diversion right before they present at a shelter so that they never go to the shelter to be diverted from the shelter. But in either case, they're out of their home. It's a question of are they out of their home today and making a plan to do something else, like go, have that conversation with the relative or a friend where they can, have that happen so that they don't have to present there. So it's diversion. It is. We're not keeping them in the home that they originally were, residing, but we are finding another way that might be better than presenting at a shelter. But I think that actual activity is probably very similar. It's having those hard conversations, looking at other resources, talking to friends, relatives, maybe relatives you haven't had that kind of conversation with for a while, so that you don't have to present it at a shelter. And I think that's a health issue too. I think at this time, we don't want our shelters to be cluttered with more humans than we need to, because it's a COVID risk, right? So, you're taking that extra step to prevent that, that contact.
Yeah. I think, it's just social dynamics and how American living now is. It's very nuclear family. You don't pair up with others as we used to do, or immigrants might be more willing and thinking about that as an option. But today it's hard to think about that, and people don't accept it as readily. But, so how do you coach somebody to have that conversation? And then try to understand, okay, what are the incentives or what are the conflicts that we need to try to figure out, tease apart.
Yeah. And then from there, how do you, to tie it all together, how do you offer them hope? This is earlier, Sharon, when we were talking, she mentioned, we know it's not going to last forever. However, right now the timeline is, we have no idea. So how do you offer those clients hope, and how do you yourselves continue to find hope in the work as you're dealing with so many challenging cases?
I think everybody, we all want to see the silver lining in these situations, and look to how, okay, it's rough right now, and what can I control? What can we, each of our organizations, control, and really make that work to the best that we can, and know that, we can't just rely on magic, but we can try to influence the outcome and our perspective, positive or negative, about it.
I agree. It is about perspective. I think that, like anyone who suffers a disaster, losing your housing is a disaster. And you are first hit by the complexities, the shock, the awe, and having somebody just coach you, get to a plan of action, can be incredibly relieving for people. And putting it in perspective that, of course, you are resilient, and, you will rebound step by step. You can recover from this. And I think that that's a perspective to share with people who are right now, that's not what they're thinking. They're having anxiety about what life has brought.
Kind of wrapping back to that CNN story, what was really beautiful about that story was there was a follow-up story the next day with that young man that had to walk away from his apartment, and he was describing how the only things that they could take with them were the things for the children, the diapers, the food, their clothes, nothing for the adults, and everything else was trash. And so the community came out in droves to raise money for that family. And so I think the hope that we have and that we want others to see is that if we can see them as individual lives, individual stories like his, that's when we feel the most empathy and compelled to want to help. And I think our community is. I mean, that's not, not surprising, right, in Houston. But how do we not get tired? Because I think we can get fatigued from all this need that still lingers. But yes, there are families and individuals like this young man who are going through some rough times, and every little bit counts. And he was tearful, and it was just beautiful to see his gratefulness.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. If we, the gratefulness, even those who can give, to not be fatigued, to recognize their own the things that they have to be grateful for, and to realize even a little bit, you can help someone else. So thank you both so much for sharing your work and helping us better understand the situation and what it looks like in the Houston area. And maybe even I'll share the links, of course, to your website so that people can see other ways that they can help as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.